So well-being is interesting because I'm just going to introduce this just a little bit from my own experience, because I was working for 20 years on measures of well-being, and that's why I first went to Bhutan, actually. I didn't even know where Bhutan was on the map until they asked me to come, because Bhutan had been coming under some pressure from international organizations like the World Bank, and they said, well, if you're not going to use GDP like all the rest of us use to measure progress, how are you going to measure this thing? So the Bhutanese had this concept of gross national happiness for quite some time, but they never thought to measure it was the last thing on their mind. But it was only international pressure that said, well, what do you mean by this? How are you going to measure it? So that's when I first went there. They asked me 2003, which is quite a while back. So what's interesting about this area is that I've never seen an area where there's greater consensus and also greater dissonance at exactly the same time. And by consensus, I mean more than what we call like-minded people in the room. You know, we've been asking this question, are we all like-minded? But I'm talking about way beyond. I'm saying this is a consensus on which left-wing and right-wing can agree without any problem. Namely, what are the constituents of well-being? What do we mean by well-being? And honestly, no one really disagrees. Who would argue that better health is worse than endemic sickness? Everyone agrees that health is a constituent of well-being, that if you have these conditions, your chances are better. Now, some people say, oh, in our little group over in the corner, one person said, yeah, you could be poor and still have a sense of well-being. Absolutely true. These are just conditions which give you greater opportunity. That's all. They're not equal to well-being. But if you're healthy, if you're not living in dire poverty, if you have some basic economic security, you know where your next meal is coming from, you're not worried about being thrown out on the street, you can pay your rent, your chances are better than if you have endemic anxiety about where your next meal is coming from. It's a better opportunity. Let's take an issue that the right really likes. The right wing likes law and order. But who on the left would disagree that it's better to live in a safe neighborhood than in a crime-ridden neighborhood? Everyone agrees. Left wing, right wing, doesn't matter. Or take a left wing issue, like greater equity. But no one on the right is going to say, no, we're in favor of more poverty. Let's have more people be poor. No one will say that. So, or same with environmental quality. Who would argue that clean air and clean water is better than polluted air and polluted water, or water that's not safe to drink? So, even if you're on the far right and diss everything environmental, but no politician dare say, no, we're in favor of, an unsustainable, dirty environment. So across the board, wherever you look, there's broad agreement on what we mean by well-being. You can't find big disagreements. Another one, education. Who would argue that ignorance is better than education? Now, we might differ on what we mean by good education, of course we do. But no one will argue that ignorance is better than knowledge. So, across the board, no problem. Left wing, right wing doesn't matter. We know what we mean by well-being. So I would suggest that instead of taking a lot of, here we needed to do this, what do we mean by justice? I don't think we need to spend any time at all talking about what we mean by well-being. Can we agree? Because if we can agree on that, then the rest can get really interesting. But if we disagree on that, we have to start there.
You said they have great consensus and dissonance at the same time. So
yes,
what's the
dissonance, we're getting to that.
Yeah.
That's what makes it interesting. Okay? But I'm talking about on these issues. Health, knowledge, safety, security, sustainability. No wonder that everyone, the right wing, is happy to use the word sustainability as the left. No one's going to argue we're in favor of a more unsustainable environment. So at least there's principles.
But Tashi, word and meaning may be different, right?
Totally.
Totally.
Just like with education.
Yeah.
Well, how do we get there?
Sure,
Okay?
sure.
So, of course, but in terms of the basic values, the outcomes that we want to see, the principles of what we actually mean by well-being, we're agreed that those are all constituents of well-being. So what about the dissonance? So, and this, it cannot help but point to the elephant. It has to. Because all those things, by the way, all of those things are very measurable. So it's no problem constructing indicators of well-being. Not so hard to do. Better health is measurable. We know if there are more smokers. We know if there's greater obesity. We know what the risk factors are. There's epidemiological evidence on all of it. We know how to measure these things. We know how to measure cleaner air, cleaner water. So all of these things, so to construct a measure of well-being, not a problem. And we can measure our progress that way. Are we getting better on all these fronts or not? We could actually measure that. But what do policymakers use as their primary measure of well-being? When they ask the question, are we better off or worse off, the first thing they look at is the economy growing? It's the number one question. If the economy is growing, we're better. And look at the journalists, by the way, they are totally complicit. You look at the words that are used in newspapers. When they use the word a healthy economy, what does healthy mean? It means it's growing. What's a weak, insipid economy? It's when it stopped growing as fast as it should. When things get really bad, they call it the depression. I mean, even look at the words, you know. So, economic growth is number one. And interestingly, the economic growth measures tell exactly the opposite story. More cigarette sales will make the economy grow. We talk about peace as our first item here, but war is really good for economic growth. The more armaments you produce, the more bombs you drop, and the faster you have to replace those bombs. All makes you, so long as you're spending money, the economy will grow. It doesn't matter on what. So long as money is being spent, so long as there's production, and so long as there's consumption, the economy will keep growing. So anything can make the economy grow. Actually, war is way better for the economy than peace is. The more greenhouse gases we emit, the more fossil fuels we burn, the more the economy will grow, and the faster it will grow. So that's why we get this hypocrisy, where politicians say one thing and sign international agreements and then do the opposite. No wonder, because the main measure to show how well we're doing is economic growth. So, yes, maybe burning less fossil fuels, I'm not sure if it'll grow the economy. But politicians dare not consider that possibility. What about the more trees we cut down and the faster we cut them down, the more timber we send to market, the more we deplete our oceans, the faster and the more fish we send to market, the faster the economy will grow. The more we deplete our natural resources, the more the economy will grow. We count in economic growth what we take out of our natural resource base. We don't count what we leave behind. No measures of the fish stocks left in the oceans. No measure of the health of the forests left behind. Economic growth only counts the timber we extract and send to market. So all these strange signals. And also, the GDP, this is all measured by what we call gross domestic product. So if the gross domestic product is going up, the economy is growing. Gross domestic product is simply the sum total of all the production and consumption going on in the country. It just adds it all up. But only what is produced and spent for pay. Unpaid work counts for nothing in our economic growth measures. So, the vast majority of unpaid work in the world is done by women. The vast majority. Such a kind of hidden form of gender discrimination. And when work moves from the unpaid economy to the paid economy, we call it economic growth, even though there's no more production happening. It's just that now it's being done for pay. So when you go to work, if a woman goes to work and has to hire a babysitter, that will make the economy grow. Look after her own child, counts for nothing. Hire a housekeeper to clean your house, the economy will grow. Marry your housekeeper, the economy will go down. Okay, so literally it is, and all of our work, we're volunteers, right? I don't know, I'm not getting paid for my time sitting in this chair, is anyone else? So, it counts for nothing. Our work is valueless in the economic growth measures. Voluntary work, because it's done without pay, counts for nothing. It's invisible. And what about equity? Every one of these issues of well-being we look at. So long as the rich are getting richer, the GDP will grow. It doesn't matter if the poor are getting poorer, GDP is an average figure. So long as it averages out, and by the way, the wealth of the richest 20%, richest 10% has been growing astronomically. So of course the GDP goes up, even if the poor are getting poorer. So again, where's the incentive to actually reduce poverty? So whatever you look at, across the board, that's where the dissonance is. That our measures of growth are entirely materialist. Nature counts for nothing. The health of human beings counts for nothing. Crime is very good for the economy. Oh, and climate change effects. Because all the prisons you build make the economy grow. All the prison guards you hire make the economy grow again. Stress is great for the economy. The more you overwork, the more the economy will grow. And then the more Valium you buy in order to try to cure your stress, the more the economy will grow again. And climate change is great for the economy because the more natural disasters and intense storms and typhoons that you have, the more the cleanup costs afterwards. So again, the more you spend on cleaning up pollution, cleaning up the mess, the more the economy will grow. So there is complete dissonance between the measures of well-being and the elephant. So the elephant is not so hidden when we look at it this way, and there's no way to avoid it. So actually, way more eloquent than anything I can say is, you know that famous quote from Robert Kennedy? So yeah, I'll just read it to you because this points right at it. Okay, this is actually shortly before he was assassinated, same year, 1968. He said, "Too much and too long we have surrendered community excellence and community values in the mere accumulation of material things. The GDP counts air pollution and cigarette advertising and ambulances to clear our highways of carnage." And motor accidents, very good for the economy. Yet the gross national product does not allow for the health of our children, the quality of their education, or the joy of their play. It measures neither our wit nor our courage, neither our wisdom nor our learning, neither our compassion nor our devotion. It measures everything, in short, except that which makes life worthwhile. Says it all. So, I thought, how can we not talk about the elephant, right? That's it. So, you can't talk about well-being and not hit it. So actually, afterwards I thought, I'm so glad that you voted for it. Sometimes democracy actually works. Mostly not, but sometimes it works.
It works for us.
So anyway, I don't know. I mean, there's a lot more to say, but oh, by the way, I want to say one thing. Okay, now to challenge that, I'll just end with this. Here's now the hard nut that we have to be willing to bite. The reality is that nature did best in the last 20 years, the last 30 years, if you look back. Nature had its best rest during the Great Recession of 2008, 2009. Greenhouse gas emissions went down, energy consumption went down, there was less production, less consumption. Recession is good for nature. Dare we say it? Dare we go out on the streets and say this? It's true. And talk about, we think of Donald Trump and George W. Bush as being the anti-environmentalists. You know where greenhouse gas emissions grew fastest in the United States? Under Bill Clinton. A so-called liberal, Democrat. Because that was an economic boom period. The faster the economy grows, the worse it is for nature. So this is the hard nut that we have to kind of dare to chew. If we're going to deal with well-being, if we're going to genuinely assess well-being, and if we're going to stare the elephant in the face wherever you're having to be touching it. I mean, if you want to touch it from a health point of view, want to touch it from an education point of view, from an equity point of view, from an environmental point of view, we're going to come up against this. It's the real McCoy.
GDP, why can't it be like for a good cause? Like you're saying that the higher the GDP is worse for the environment?
Oh yeah, that's actually a really important question. GDP does measure the good things. Oh yeah. So, for example, if you have flute lessons, and you pay, let's say, if you pay your flute teacher, that's good, that makes the GDP, GDP doesn't distinguish. I've been emphasizing the dissonance. The GDP counts every time we spend money, even if that money is well spent. If it's spent on education, if it's spent on good health, if it's spent on music, on art, that also makes the GDP grow. So that's actually, the problem is it doesn't distinguish between what's beneficial and what's harmful. It doesn't make a distinction between what's good and what's bad. It just puts it all together. The good, the bad, and the ugly, all in one thing. Okay? That's the problem. But it's a very important question, because I was trying to show the dissonance with well-being, but you're right. So the greatest architect of GDP ended up, and by the way, he said, the person who designed the GDP, he actually said, never use this to measure how well we're doing. Simon Kuznets said that. All it does is measure how much we're growing and how much we're not growing. That's all. It doesn't, and he warned them, he said, never use this to measure how well off we are. To do that, he said exactly what you were asking. He said, you always have to ask, what is growing? Not how much is growing, but what is growing. So he was actually very disillusioned by the way GDP was misused for a purpose that he never intended. I think that's what you were asking.
When did GDP become a measurable?
Oh, that's a really good question actually on this subject. So it used to be called gross national product, and then about 20 years ago it was switched. And that's just a technical, I can explain that, but not worth it here, okay? It actually, this is very interesting. The architects of this measure included Nobel Prize winner Simon Kuznets. And he was working for the United States Commerce Department in the 1930s. And he had such an argument with the Commerce Department because they excluded the value of unpaid work. And he said, this is production. If we're going to count production, you have to count that. And so the architect of GDP ended up realizing he created a monster. It's a little bit like those who split the atom and then ended up, Albert Einstein, what did I just do? So it was actually first used during the Second World War very logically, because during the Second World War, the concern was to ramp up economic production. You had to produce as many warships and planes and bombs as quickly as possible. So it made sense to actually look at, are we being productive enough and how to ramp up, but it was used as a wartime measure. And then it kind of set in for a use it was never intended for. That's how it was first actually put into practice during the Second World War. And by the way, at the end of the Second World War, the architects of our present economic system, the people who created the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, and all the other things that have become monsters, that was right at the end of the Second World War at what's called the Bretton Woods Conference.
Yeah.
And those poor people, they hadn't heard about climate change. They thought natural resources were forever. They didn't know that you could fish our oceans dry. You know, they didn't know that you could consume faster than the earth could replenish its resources. I don't blame them for building a system based on this, but we know better now. They had an excuse, we don't. They didn't know, but that's when it happened.
When did GDP become a measurable
Oh, that's a really good question, actually, on this subject. So it used to be called gross national product, and then about 20 years ago, it was switched. And that's just a technical, I mean, I can explain that, but not worth it here, okay? It actually, this is very interesting. The architects of this measure included Nobel Prize winner Simon Kuznets. And he was working for the United States Commerce Department in the 1930s. And he had such an argument with the Commerce Department because they excluded the value of unpaid work. And he said, this is production. If we're going to count production, you have to count that. And so the architect of GDP ended up realizing he created a monster. It's a little bit like those who split the atom and then ended up, Albert Einstein, what did I just do? You know? So it was actually first used during the Second World War. Very logically, because during the Second World War, the concern was to ramp up economic production. You had to produce as many warships and planes and bombs as quickly as possible. So it made sense to actually look at, are we being productive enough and how to ramp up, but it was used as a wartime measure. And then it kind of set in for a use it was never intended for. That's how it was first actually put into practice during the Second World War. And by the way, at the end of the Second World War, the architects of our present economic system, the people who created the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, and all the other things that have become monsters, that was right at the end of the Second World War at what's called the Bretton Woods Conference.
Yeah.
And those poor people, they hadn't heard about climate change. They thought natural resources were forever. They didn't know that you could fish our oceans dry. You know, they didn't know that you could consume faster than the earth could replenish its resources. I don't blame them for building a system based on this, but we know better now. They had an excuse, we don't. They didn't know, but that's when it happened. It was in 1946 that all these institutions actually came into being, that are the pillars of our present economic system. It might surprise you if you hear me say there's nothing wrong with GDP. I really mean it. There's nothing wrong with it if it's used for the purpose for which it was intended. It's actually a great measure to find out if the economy is going up or down. But you know, it doesn't mean that much. If you ask the average person in the street, how do you feel about our GDP growth rate? They won't even know what you're talking about. It doesn't have to, right now it gives an adrenaline rush to, you know, policymakers, corporations, blah, blah, blah. But if it's just for that purpose, it becomes way less important. We don't have to tinker with GDP. The alternative is very simple. Let it do what it does it fine. but put it in its place. Instead, the answer is so simple. Are greenhouse gas emissions going up or down? Is cigarette smoking going up or down? Are pollution levels reducing or increasing? Is our ecological footprint smaller or larger? All of those things are measurable. So that's what you measure. And it's so straightforward. And then if at election time, when it comes election, you then judge the political parties on how did you do the last 4 or 5 years? According to, okay, now we have a scorecard here. During your tenure of office, did greenhouse gas emissions go up or down? Let's check. Okay, and then we vote based on, not on, but we actually have so it can be used in a very sane, simple, straightforward way. So we know exactly how their performance is. Are they improving things or not?
So since you mentioned the gross GNH or gross national happiness, which is a Bhutanese measure, if a large country like India or some other countries also, like the BRICS nations for instance, developing economies try to adopt the Bhutanese system, would that threaten the Bretton Woods institution? What are the parameters which are part of Bhutan's way of calculating it, and how would it contribute to well-being in India as a whole? So my interest is in mental health, mental wellness, physical wellness as a part of that as well. So how would the shift from gross national product to gross national happiness, how would that impact well-being and the economic system and the politics?
We were talking about it. Who was using the word new paradigm? Yeah. So even the words we use change. Words like cost, investment, expense. So from a gross national happiness point of view, or whatever you want to call it, a well-being point of view, doesn't matter what word we use, an investment in mental health, which now counts as a cost, governments have to spend money, will actually produce long-term payoffs, long-term benefits. You know, the longest hospitalization of any chronic illness is in mental health. People who suffer from mental illness actually, so the costs to the healthcare system are much greater from not investing in preventative measures at the start. That's true across the board. Preventative measures, although they look like costs on government budgets right now, which is why they're always cut and slashed every time there's a budget, actually they are investments in the future. Okay, the former chief economist of the World Bank, Lord Nicholas Stern, one of the top economists in the world, he was also vice president of the World Bank. He was commissioned by the United Kingdom government to do a study on the costs of climate change. He found that the costs of stabilizing greenhouse gas emissions in the atmosphere, this was about 15 years ago, would be expensive. It would come to about 1% of total global GDP. So there's a cost to be paid. But then he calculated what are the costs of not doing anything. What are the costs of minimum, according to the most optimistic models 15 years ago, which by the way have now been, 5% of GDP. The more realistic models, 20% of GDP. So the 1% investment now produces 20 times the avoided damage in the future. But whenever anyone talks about reducing greenhouse gas emissions, they only look at one side of the equation. One side of the equation is how much it's going to cost us. How much is this measure going to cost us? They don't look at what's the cost going to be if we don't act. So the other side of the equation is always ignored.
So happiness is there might be parameters for it, but well-being is something that you can have parameters more easily, as you suggested. So should we be pushing globally for a different measure of gross national well-being, and how would that fly?
Yeah, you see, this is one of these tricky things. When the fourth king of Bhutan first used the term, and he was just asked by a journalist when he was coming back from a non-aligned conference in Havana And he was in Bombay, and an Indian journalist said, how's Bhutan's gross national product doing? And he said, just spontaneously, gross national happiness is more important than gross national product. That was his answer. So, but when he used the word happiness, he wasn't using it in the way that that English word is used. When we use the word happiness, it means a mood that comes and goes. I'm happy today, sad tomorrow. He was talking about an underlying sense of what we might call well-being, some contentment, some understanding and recognition that our well-being does not come from material things alone. So I think it's tricky. I don't think we should use the word happiness because it's misused and mistranslated. There's something called the World Happiness Index, which is a charade. Don't get me into that.
Happiness is such a subjective, state. How are we quantifying it and then assessing it?
We're not.
How are we
This is
figuring
really
it out?
important. It comes back to what was asked. So we never try to measure happiness. It's impossible.
How do we get GNH?
So yeah, okay. I've had arguments with the Bhutanese about this one. So the only thing we can do is measure conditions which create better opportunities for
Better?
people. Better opportunities.
Oh,
That's all we can do. Someone could be living in poverty. They could be having the worst conditions. They could never have been to school, and they might be way happier than someone with a PhD from Harvard who's raking it in, So we never claim in our work that we're measuring happiness. And when the Bhutanese put that question on their census, are you happy? I was so sad. You can't. Oh, someone just said something nice to me, so yes. Someone just insulted me, no. It's meaningless, so we don't, the answer is a simple no, we don't even try, because it's
Modi
not
knows
possible.
very well.
Tashi, don't you think GNH is a bit of a misnomer?
Yes, not from the point of view in which the king used it. He was talking, quite frankly, from a Buddhist point of view. So the Buddha said, everyone wants happiness, but no one knows how to get it.
Yeah.
Buddha's own words, right?
Yes.
That's the way he was using it. So we think that by pursuing external things, we're going to get happier by having higher income, buying more stuff, going shopping, whatever it is. So that's what he was taking issue with. So unfortunately, the way we use the word happiness today doesn't work.
You were talking about the preventive, no? To prevent mental unhappiness,
Oh
if you
yeah,
could call that.
yeah, not just mental. Yeah,
What
across
would be the preventive?
Oh, across the board. Right? Okay, everyone in the room can say this. So if you want to have a healthier population, what do? For example, anybody.
Clean air, clean water.
That's right. Clean air, clean water. Or you could say raise the tax on cigarettes. Or you could say raise the tax on junk food. There are many, many solutions across the board. So if you want to have less crime, what do? You look at what are the social causes of crime and you invest in ameliorating the causes of crime. So there are, across the board, we know what to do to prevent, we have all the solutions we need for climate change. We are not short of solutions. We know how to have sustainable agriculture. There are farmers who are productive and amazing, and every year the soil quality improves rather than deteriorates. We know how to harvest forests sustainably through selection harvesting rather than clear cutting. All of the solutions are out there. All of the preventive measures are available.
Thank you.
There was a part in his question about when Bhutan was doing this, what kind of resistance was there, or how did the global financial bodies react to that?
In a nutshell, so long as Bhutan was just talking in vague terms about happiness, no problem. But when it started getting serious, so at the point it started getting serious was Bhutan took this to the United Nations and proposed quote, a new economic paradigm.
Oh, wow.
And at that meeting at the United Nations, we actually had 800, the president of Costa Rica came out, the Secretary General of the United Nations was there, so my job was to coordinate that meeting, which was a little stressful. And, but Nobel Prize winners came, Joe Stiglitz came, Vandana Shiva, and people came from, and it was an attempt, and it was very clear, we live within the planetary boundaries, within the capacity of the Earth to support us. There has to be more equitable distribution of resources, which have to be used more efficiently. It was very practical, and there was a lot of enthusiasm. But in the planning stages, Bhutan, we were using words like, we need a new Bretton Woods. So when the World Bank people saw that in print, 3 of them showed up on the doorstep of the Prime Minister and said, could you not mention that, please? And then across the board, the forces of opposition started, the big players made clear that, no, World Bank said, by the way, don't forget that you're a recipient of our aid. Remember that. So, the donors, because Bhutan at that time, until quite recently, it was classified as a least developed country, according to GDP per capita. So it was eligible for aid, and so on. So, all of that was suddenly imperiled. And then, this is the saddest part, betrayal, Bhutan's own foreign ministry started trying to water everything down and eviscerate everything and kind of, we assembled a team of 70 amazing international experts, including from India, to craft the details of this new economic paradigm. And it was basically undercut, watered down, and then the term was changed. No, let's not call it new economic paradigm, let's call it new development paradigm. The language started shifting, everything, and so it basically, sorry I missed that part of your question there. All the documentation's there, all the solutions are there, we don't have to rewrite the documents, we don't have to edit this or that. I can show you Bhutan's statement to Rio Plus 20, I'm telling you, it's there. Equity, everything is there. But how to? I don't know. We took it all the way to United Nations headquarters, but the Secretary General didn't work. So I don't know if that's the way. Maybe Greta's got a better way.
Yeah.
She might. So that's why I'm thinking, maybe we just had the wrong target audience all along. Maybe we shouldn't have been aiming this at policy makers and blah, blah, blah. Maybe we just had... She's got a different audience. That's not her audience. She tells them, you failed us. We're not that interested in talking to you. You want me to talk? Okay, I'll tell you what I think of you.
So just 2 quick comments. One is, I think New Zealand recently announced that they will stop measuring GDP. That was the other country that I read about, at least in the newspaper, that said that the GDP as a metric is useless and they're going to trash it. I don't know where that conversation has gone. The second thing is, why, I think someone asked, when is it that GDP became so big, and it was after Second World War, but I think where the nexus between the government and the corporations took over, and corporations obviously driven by capitalism, wealth maximization, and by greed, started working with the state in making sure that their agenda gets fulfilled at all costs, is when all of this happened. So are there any movements which people know of where organizations or initiatives have been successfully able to expose the politics and deal with it between corporations and the government? Because that is behind all of this, in my opinion. And if one can deal with that, which is very difficult to deal with because of the power involved and the authority involved, then we should learn from those initiatives as to how they were able to weaken this strong tie that is there. And we are seeing it everywhere. I mean, it's there in US, it's there in India, and that's what's driving all of this.
I mentioned that I worked with 3 governments. One was in Canada, Bhutan, and New Zealand. Because they also asked me to go there and work with them. So for 10 years, they were very committed to this new path. I think it helps to be a little bit far away and isolated and kind of, to kind of try something new. So the New Zealanders were somehow far enough removed that they... So this was actually a big initiative in the 1990s and up to 2008. So I was there 2003, 2004, 2005, 2006, each year. So I was working with them. And then in 2008, the government, which was at that time under Helen Clark, was defeated by the National Party, which immediately reversed everything. Okay, so that's, and by the way, same in Bhutan. Politics, I'm not sure, because you might get a visionary leader, and then bam, next election, impose a carbon tax, sure death at the next election. Try to do something genuine for climate change that slows the economy, you're gone. So, I don't know if politics, I think what's driving the corporations is us. It's our consumption. I wouldn't look at the politicians. I would look at closer to home. Corporations wouldn't thrive if they started buying this stuff.
You said that the GDP doesn't account for voluntary work, which basically means unpaid work, right? Now, with this, over the internet, hundreds of millions of citizens like us, or internet users, are doing unpaid work for corporations. Because every time we sign up to something which has terms and conditions, they say that they can take all your contacts, all your information, all your preferences, they can write emails for you, they can take everything of you, and that translates into millions and millions of dollars which go into the pockets of the corporations. And this is unpaid work that we are doing every time we go online, more or less, every one of us. So this is a little thing which is now began to be studied in some quarters, and I just thought I'd mention it.
But the